The gentle hum of the car's engine filled the quiet as they neared the old stone church, nestled between weeping willows and a soft blanket of wildflowers. 13-year-old Lily sat in the back seat, her gaze fixed on the gray clouds overhead as they drifted somberly over the horizon. She clutched a worn handkerchief embroidered with tiny blue flowers, one of the many small tokens from her grandmother, Elena. She could almost feel her grandmother's gentle presence in the delicate, faded fabric, and the thought both comforted and pained her. Today would be the last time she'd say goodbye. Beside her sat her father, Marcus, whose hand rested on her shoulder, a warm but silent gesture of comfort. His face wore the unmistakable strain of loss, but there was a warmth in his eyes as he looked at her, a sense of understanding and connection that had always been there between them. But in the front seat sat Camila, her stepmother, whose presence seemed to chill the air itself. She wore a rigid expression, her eyes focused forward, lips drawn into a thin line. Everything about her exuded control, her demeanor more appropriate for a business transaction than a funeral. Lily wondered if Camila felt anything at all. As the church came into view, Lily's heart began to race. Her grandmother had been her confidant, her sanctuary, a woman of quiet resilience, who had loved her fiercely. But there was a darkness behind this day, a truth only Lily knew, one that weighed on her like a heavy stone. She swallowed hard, pressing her fingers into the handkerchief as if seeking strength from her grandmother's memory. She knew she had to speak up, but fear clawed at her resolve. The truth was ugly, tangled in secrets that she knew would shatter the fragile calm around her. "Remember, Lily," Camila's voice cut through the silence, sharp and controlled. "We're here to honor Elena. Let's keep things dignified." Her words were polite, but there was an unmistakable warning in her gaze, visible through the rearview mirror. Camila's eyes, cold and calculating, held Lily's for a beat too long, as if to remind her of the unspoken rules she was expected to follow. Lily felt Marcus's hand tighten on her shoulder, as if sensing the tension, and he gave her a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "Take your time, sweetheart," he murmured softly, his voice filled with kindness. "We're here to say goodbye, and Grandma would want us to remember her with love." The car rolled to a stop, and they stepped out onto the church steps, where mourners dressed in muted shades of black and gray gathered in small clusters, whispering in hushed voices. Lily could see familiar faces, distant relatives and friends, all gathered to pay their respects. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that behind the stoic figure Camila presented was a different woman, a woman who had brought pain and secrecy into their lives. A woman who, Lily suspected, had hurt her grandmother in ways far more damaging than anyone knew. As they entered the church, the air thickened with the scent of old wood and fresh lilies. A quiet hush fell over the room as the mourners found their seats, all eyes drifting toward the closed casket adorned with Elena's favorite wildflowers. The sight filled Lily with a wave of grief so powerful she felt her legs nearly buckle. She took a shaky breath, her fingers brushing over the small handkerchief in her hand once more. "I have to do this for you, Grandma. I can't let her lies be the last thing they remember." They found seats at the front, with Camila positioning herself on the aisle, her posture tall and dignified as if she were attending an event of her own making. Marcus sat beside Lily, his face etched with sorrow, his hand finding hers and giving it a gentle, reassuring squeeze. She clung to that comfort, the one steady anchor in the midst of this storm. The funeral began with a soft hymn, a song of remembrance that filled the cavernous space of the church. Lily closed her eyes, letting the melody wash over her, the words seeping into her heart. She thought of her grandmother's gentle smile, her laughter that filled every room, and the countless afternoons they'd spent together, reading, talking, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. But alongside those memories was the nagging image of Camila, cold and unyielding, the darkness she had brought into their lives lurking just beneath the surface. When the hymn ended, Marcus rose to speak, his voice trembling slightly as he delivered a heartfelt eulogy. He spoke of Elena's kindness, her boundless love, and her wisdom. His words wove a portrait of the woman who had meant so much to Lily, the woman who had been a pillar of strength and grace. Marcus's voice cracked, his love and loss tangible in every word. As he spoke, tears pricked at the corners of Lily's eyes, a mix of sadness and resolve building within her. And then Camila stood to speak. Her expression was carefully composed, her voice a study in controlled sorrow. She spoke of Elena in polite, detached terms, her words perfectly crafted but devoid of any real emotion. To anyone who didn't know her, she might have appeared respectful, even dignified. But to Lily, each word felt like an insult, a lie. The woman standing there, pretending to mourn, was the same woman who had turned their home into a place of fear and silence. She was the reason Lily's heart beat fast with apprehension and why the truth felt trapped, lodged deep within her chest. As Camila concluded her speech, her gaze once again found Lily's, a silent warning passing between them. But something had changed. Perhaps it was the memories of her grandmother, or the pain of her father's loss, but a spark ignited within Lily. She could feel her grandmother's spirit urging her on, a silent encouragement that she knew she couldn't ignore. With a deep breath, Lily rose to her feet. She felt the weight of every eye in the room settle upon her, their curiosity mixed with surprise. She looked over at her father, who nodded slightly, his expression filled with gentle encouragement. And then, she looked at Camila, whose face had turned a shade paler, her composure slipping just a fraction. "Grandma was everything to me," Lily began, her voice trembling but steady. "She was kind and wise, always there to protect and guide me. And she was brave. She taught me to be brave too." She paused, glancing at the crowd, feeling their anticipation, their unspoken question. And then she took the leap, her heart pounding in her chest. "She didn't die just because she was old or sick," Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. "There's more to it. There are things that should be said." She looked straight at Camila, her gaze unyielding. "Things that some people would rather stay hidden." The room shifted with a murmur of surprise, the first signs of tension crackling through the air. Camila's face hardened, a forced smile playing on her lips as she quickly stepped forward, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder with a firm grip. "Lily, sweetheart, I know you're grieving. It's okay to feel confused," she said, her tone syrupy but laced with control. But Lily pulled away, her heart pounding with newfound courage. She looked around the room, seeing Benson, the family's elderly butler, watching her with a hint of something in his eyes, a glimmer of support, of understanding. A palpable tension filled the room as Lily's words echoed through the church. The collective shock among the mourners was unmistakable, but her stepmother, Camila, seemed unfazed. Instead, she tightened her grip on Lily's shoulder, forcing a smile that barely reached her eyes. "Lily is just overwhelmed," Camila announced to the crowd, her tone smooth and polished. "We've all been through so much. Let's focus on honoring Elena's memory." She gave Lily a warning squeeze, trying to steer her back into silence. Lily looked up at her father, Marcus, who stood by with a mix of confusion and concern on his face. His eyes held an unspoken question, his usually gentle expression now clouded by uncertainty. But he didn't interrupt. Lily could tell he wanted her to have the space to speak, to express herself. Taking a deep breath, she pulled away from Camila's grasp, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was her only chance. If she stayed silent, the truth would be buried with her grandmother, a secret lost to those who cared about her. But if she spoke, if she dared to expose what had happened, maybe, just maybe, she could bring a sliver of justice to Elena's memory. Lily took a step forward, facing the crowd. My grandmother, she struggled to find the words, glancing nervously at her father for support. She wasn't just some frail old woman who quietly slipped away in her sleep. She was afraid, in her own home, and she tried to tell me things before she passed away. She hinted that something wasn't right. A ripple of murmurs spread through the congregation, faces turning to one another in whispered confusion and shock. Camila's face twisted briefly, a flicker of anger crossing her otherwise calm mask. Lily, enough, Camila hissed under her breath, her tone barely masking her irritation. This is not the place. But Lily stood firm, her gaze defiant. She felt a strength growing within her, a strength she knew her grandmother would be proud of. This is the only place, Camila, she replied, her voice steady and louder than she intended. I can't pretend that everything was perfect because it wasn't. Grandma was suffering, and I think she wanted me to say something. Marcus, finally realizing the gravity of what Lily was saying, stepped forward, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Lily, sweetheart, what are you trying to say? His tone was soft, but his eyes were filled with worry. Lily took a shaky breath. Dad, Grandma left us hints. She wanted us to know that something wasn't right. That maybe someone was making her life harder, even hurting her. Camila's smile faltered, her calm exterior cracking. What a horrible thing to suggest, Lily, she said with forced restraint, her voice laced with condescension. Elena was old, and people get confused at that age. You shouldn't let your grief make you say things that aren't true. But Lily wasn't alone. She felt a comforting hand slip into hers, and when she looked up, she saw Benson, the family's butler, standing beside her. Benson, with his silver hair and kind eyes, had been with the family for decades, a quiet yet steady presence. He nodded at her, a gesture of silent encouragement, and spoke softly. Perhaps we should listen to the young lady, Benson said, his voice calm but firm. She has something to say. And perhaps Elena did too. Camila's face hardened. She shot Benson a look of pure anger, a silent warning that Lily noticed. Benson seemed unfazed, his steady gaze unwavering. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, leather-bound book, a journal. Lily, he said gently, handing her the journal, your grandmother entrusted me with this before she passed. She asked me to give it to you, when you were ready. Lily took the journal with trembling hands, her heart racing as she opened its worn cover. Inside, the familiar, looping handwriting of her grandmother filled the pages. She scanned a few lines, her pulse quickening as she read the words that held truths hidden away for far too long. Camila has been relentless, insisting on handling my finances, overseeing my affairs as though I am incapable. It's as if she's waiting, biding her time. My dear Lily, I worry what will become of you if I am no longer here. I see the way Camila eyes you, controlling and manipulating, and I fear for your future. As she read, her eyes filled with tears. She felt a surge of emotions, grief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. Her grandmother had known, had felt the darkness that Lily had seen lurking beneath Camila's surface. She knew, Lily whispered, looking up at her father. Grandma knew that something was wrong. She wrote it all down. She held the journal out to Marcus, who took it with shaking hands, his face paling as he began to read. The crowd stirred, their murmurs growing louder as the weight of Lily's words sank in. Friends and relatives, all who had believed in the harmonious image Camila projected, now watched her with suspicion and discomfort. Camila's composed expression finally cracked, her eyes flashing with panic. This is absurd, she spat, her voice sharper now, all pretense of calm shattered. "Marcus, you're not really going to believe this nonsense, are you? It's a child's fantasy, fueled by grief." But Marcus ignored her, his eyes fixed on the words scrawled in the journal. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" he whispered to himself, the realization of his own blindness dawning on him. He looked at Camila, his face now hard with anger. "How could you? How could you do this to my mother, to our family?" Camila took a step back, her gaze darting around the room as if seeking an escape. This is ridiculous," she stammered, her voice growing desperate. "You have no proof, only the ramblings of an old woman." "Proof?" Benson's voice cut through the tension. "There are other things, Camila, things I've witnessed myself. Elena confided in me, and I kept silent because I thought it was just the strain of age, but now I see I was wrong. She was trying to protect Lily. Protect all of us." The room fell into silence, the mourners now fully captivated by the unfolding revelations. Camila's confident mask had crumbled completely, replaced by fear and desperation. She glanced around the room, as if searching for an ally, but found only horrified faces staring back at her. I did what was best for this family," she said, her voice a shaky whisper. "Elena she wasn't well, and I took on responsibilities she couldn't handle." "That's not true," Lily replied, her voice filled with a courage she hadn't known she possessed. "You took control because you wanted to. You isolated her, made her feel powerless." She looked around the room, addressing everyone now. "Grandma was terrified of her, and I was too. But I'm not afraid anymore." Camila's face contorted with rage. "Enough," she shouted, her voice echoing through the church. But in that instant, her outburst only served to confirm everything Lily had said. There was no longer any facade to maintain, no mask of composure left to hide behind. Marcus stepped forward, his face a mixture of grief and anger. He placed a protective arm around Lily, standing between her and Camila. "You're finished, Camila," he said quietly, his voice laced with finality. "I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. You won't hurt us anymore." In that moment, Camila's world crumbled, her control shattered before the people she had deceived for so long. She looked around one last time, realizing she was truly alone. The silence that followed Marcus's words was dense, as if the church itself had drawn a collective breath. Camila's face had lost all its color, her once calm expression now replaced by one of fury and desperation. She seemed to sway slightly, unsteady under the weight of her own deceit laid bare. Around her, mourners whispered, the weight of betrayal spreading through the room like wildfire. Faces that had once looked upon her with admiration now bore expressions of shock, disbelief, and even disgust. Lily felt her father's reassuring arm around her, grounding her, lending her the strength she needed to take the next steps. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the church fixed on her, watching her every move, every breath. Her hands shook, but she stood firm, determined to honor her grandmother's memory and ensure the truth would be known. Just then, Benson, the family butler, cleared his throat, his gaze steady as he looked around the room. He turned to Marcus and Lily, a look of resolve in his kind, aged eyes. "If I may, I have something that may bring further light to the situation," he announced, his voice calm and measured. Everyone's attention shifted to Benson as he pulled a small envelope from his jacket pocket. He looked directly at Marcus. "Elena entrusted me with this letter a few weeks before her passing," he explained. "She asked me to give it to her family only if it ever became necessary. I believe today is that day." With trembling hands, Marcus took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink slightly smudged, but the words clear. He began to read aloud, his voice heavy with emotion. To my dearest family, the letter began, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. I wish I could have said these words in person, but there are things that must be known, things that I could not say aloud in my final days. A hush fell over the room as Marcus continued to read, his voice breaking slightly with each line. I have lived a life of love and gratitude, blessed by my children and my beloved granddaughter, Lily. But there is a shadow that has haunted our home, and that shadow is Camila. Gasps echoed through the room, and Camila's face grew red with anger and embarrassment. She shifted uncomfortably, her mouth opening as if to defend herself, but Marcus's voice overpowered her. Camila came into our lives as a supportive figure, someone who seemed to care for Marcus and Lily. But over time, her true intentions revealed themselves. She is a master of control and manipulation, and I fear what she may do to my family after I am gone. She has isolated me, humiliated me, and tried to strip away my independence. She seeks only wealth and power, and I beg of you, my dear family, to be wary. Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks as she listened. Her grandmother's fears, her warnings, all of it was there, etched into the very words she had left behind. She could see the pain her grandmother must have felt, knowing she was leaving her family vulnerable to Camila's cruelty. I am grateful to Benson, who has stood by me with loyalty and compassion, even when I felt most alone, the letter continued. And to my darling Lily, my sweet, brave girl, do not be afraid. Stand firm in truth and justice, and remember that you are stronger than you know. I love you more than words can express. As the final words were read, a silence thicker than before filled the room. Marcus lowered the letter, his hand shaking as he struggled to process the weight of his mother's words. He looked at Camila, his gaze now filled not only with anger but also with a deep, profound sadness. Camila's face twisted in desperation as she took a step forward, her voice raised in an attempt to salvage what little dignity remained. This is all nonsense, she cried, her voice wavering. An old woman's ramblings, a mind clouded by age and illness. None of it is true. You know that, don't you? She looked around the room, searching for support, but found only cold stares in return. Benson stepped forward, his voice calm yet firm. With all due respect, Camila, I was there. I saw the way you treated Elena. I saw the subtle cruelty, the manipulation. You treated her as if she were a burden, something to be managed, rather than a beloved family member. And I remained silent because I believed it was not my place, but now, I regret my silence. Lily's heart swelled with gratitude for Benson's courage. His words echoed her own experiences, her memories of the countless times Camila had belittled her grandmother, diminished her spirit. She saw Camila's anger shift to fear, the confidence that once defined her crumbling with each passing moment. Finally, Marcus turned to his daughter, his voice choked with regret. Lily. I'm so sorry. I should have seen this. I should have protected you, and I should have been there for my mother. His words were filled with pain, and Lily could see the guilt in his eyes, a weight he would carry with him from that day forward. Lily placed her hand over her father's, giving it a gentle squeeze. It's not your fault, Dad. We were all deceived. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with understanding. But we can make things right now. Marcus nodded, a spark of determination igniting within him. He turned to Camila, his voice steady and unyielding. This is over, Camila. Your lies, your control, it ends today. In that moment, as if on cue, several people in the congregation reached for their phones, capturing the scene unfolding before them. Camila's face grew pale as she realized that her carefully constructed image was falling apart before the entire community. In one last desperate attempt to regain control, Camila raised her voice, her tone frantic. You can't do this to me, Marcus. I was your wife, the one who stood by you. Her words came out in a shrill pitch, her hands reaching out as if to plead with him. Marcus shook his head, his expression resolute. No, Camila. You stood by me as long as it benefited you. But you've hurt this family beyond measure, and I can't ignore that any longer. At that moment, the large wooden doors of the church creaked open, and 2 police officers entered, their uniforms a stark contrast against the somber crowd. Marcus had made the call earlier, his quiet conversation with Benson ensuring that there would be no escape for Camila. As they approached, she looked around wildly, her face a mask of desperation. You can't do this, she cried, her voice filled with fear. This is all lies. You can't prove anything. But Marcus simply held up the letter, his mother's last words, and handed it to the officers. This is all the proof I need, he said quietly, his voice filled with conviction. One of the officers placed a hand on Camila's arm, guiding her gently but firmly toward the exit. She resisted, twisting and shouting, but there was no longer any power in her words. The truth had been revealed, and there was no way to hide from it. As the doors closed behind them, a heavy silence settled over the room once again. Marcus turned to Lily, his eyes filled with a mixture of grief and relief. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, his arms a shield around her. It's over, he whispered, his voice soft but certain. We're finally free. Lily hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of all that had happened settle within her. She knew that the scars left behind would take time to heal, but in that moment, surrounded by her father and the lingering presence of her grandmother, she felt a newfound sense of peace. They had spoken the truth, faced the darkness, and emerged on the other side. As the heavy church doors closed behind Camila and the police officers, a profound silence lingered over the congregation. It was as if everyone was absorbing the gravity of what had just unfolded, each person processing the shocking truth about a woman they had thought they knew. Some wore expressions of disbelief, others of relief, while a few shared tearful glances with Marcus and Lily, silently offering their support. Benson, standing beside Marcus and Lily, placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. His face was etched with sadness but also a deep sense of pride. Elena would be so proud of both of you, he said softly. You honored her today in a way that few would have had the courage to do. Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor, his voice thick with emotion. I can't believe I didn't see it sooner, Benson. I can't believe I let her, he broke off, his voice faltering. Lily slipped her hand into his, her smaller fingers gripping his tightly, offering him strength. It's not your fault, Dad, she whispered. Grandma knew you loved her, and she knew you would have protected her if you'd known. I think she'd just be glad that we're safe now. Marcus looked down at his daughter, a soft smile breaking through his grief. He brushed a stray tear from her cheek. You're right, Lily. And you were braver than any of us. I'm so proud of you. A gentle murmur rose among the mourners, many of them coming forward to offer their condolences, but also to express their support. They spoke softly to Marcus and Lily, sharing stories of Elena's kindness and strength, each memory adding to the collective portrait of the remarkable woman they had lost. One by one, they filed out, leaving Marcus, Lily, and Benson in the quiet sanctity of the church. Benson cleared his throat, his usual calm demeanor tinged with emotion. Elena was like family to me, he said, his voice soft. I promised her that I would look after you both if anything happened to her. I intend to keep that promise. Marcus reached out, clasping Benson's hand in gratitude. Thank you, Benson. For everything. You were there for her when we weren't, and that means more than you'll ever know. Benson gave a small nod, his gaze dropping to the floor. She was a remarkable woman. One of the best I've ever known. Together, the three of them stood in silence, each lost in their own memories of Elena. For Lily, those memories were vibrant and full of life: summer spent in the garden, picking ripe tomatoes with her grandmother, chilly autumn evenings when they'd curl up by the fire, reading stories together. Her grandmother had been her guiding light, her confidant. Even in her final days, Elena had tried to protect her. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice breaking the stillness. "Come on, Lily. Let's go home." His words were gentle, yet filled with the weight of the journey they had all just endured. They walked slowly out of the church, Lily clutching the small leather journal that had revealed so much. Outside, the clouds were parting, letting slivers of sunlight peek through. It was as if the world, too, was slowly brightening after a dark storm. As they reached the car, Marcus stopped, looking at Lily with a thoughtful expression. "Would you like to stop by Grandma's house?" he asked. "Just for a bit. I think it might be nice to say a proper goodbye." Lily's face softened, and she nodded. "I'd like that, Dad." The drive to Elena's house was quiet, the familiar scenery blurring past the window as Lily's mind wandered back to the countless weekends and holidays she had spent there. When they finally arrived, she felt a bittersweet pang of nostalgia as they walked up the pathway, past the flowerbeds her grandmother had tended to with such love. Inside, the house felt eerily still, filled with the echoes of a life well lived. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, reminding Lily of the sachets her grandmother used to place in drawers and closets. They wandered through the house, each room holding memories that flooded back in waves. In the living room, they found a small box resting on the table, a note in Elena's handwriting resting on top. Marcus picked it up, reading aloud. "For my Lily, my brave girl. A little something to remember me by." Lily opened the box carefully, her eyes widening as she lifted out a delicate silver locket, its surface engraved with tiny floral patterns. Inside, she found a small photo of herself as a baby, cradled in her grandmother's arms, both of them smiling with pure, unguarded joy. The sight brought fresh tears to her eyes, and she clutched the locket tightly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was as if her grandmother were right there beside her, offering her comfort and strength one last time. Marcus placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She'll always be with us, Lily. She lives on in us, in our memories and the love she gave us." Lily nodded, her fingers brushing over the locket. "I miss her so much, Dad. But I feel like she's watching over us somehow." She glanced up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I want to keep her memory alive. I want to remember everything she taught me, everything she believed in." Marcus knelt beside her, looking into her eyes with the same determination. "Then we will, Lily. We'll honor her by living the way she taught us to live, with honesty, kindness, and courage." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the house, gathering small keepsakes that held special meaning to them. A favorite book of Elena's, a shawl she always wore, and a small porcelain dish where she'd kept her rings. Each item felt like a piece of her, a tangible reminder of the woman who had been the heart of their family. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light through the windows, they finally locked the door and walked back to the car. The day had been heavy with revelations and farewells, but as they drove away, there was a sense of closure, a peace that came from knowing they had spoken the truth and honored Elena's memory. Back at home, Lily placed the locket on her bedside table, right beside her grandmother's journal. She knew it wouldn't be easy moving forward, but she felt a new strength within her, a strength born from the love and resilience her grandmother had passed down to her. As she lay in bed that night, the weight of the day's events pressing on her, she closed her eyes and imagined Elena's voice, soft and comforting, a whisper in the quiet darkness. "Be brave, my Lily. Stand in truth, and never be afraid to shine." With those words echoing in her mind, Lily drifted off to sleep, carrying her grandmother's legacy in her heart, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.